Vin Diesel has spent decades playing the toughest man in Hollywood. Explosions behind him. Muscles on display. Never afraid. Never emotional. But at the 2026 Cannes Film Festival, in front of the entire world, something happened nobody expected. Vin Diesel broke down in tears. His voice cracked. He struggled to speak. And then he revealed a promise he made to Paul Walker years ago, a promise he has quietly carried for more than a decade. What he said left the entire room speechless. The night was supposed to be a celebration. 25 years of Fast and Furious. One of the biggest movie franchises ever made. Cannes had organized a special event to honor the series that turned street racing into a global phenomenon. Cameras flashed. Fans cheered. The cast gathered together again. Everything felt huge. But then Vin Diesel stepped onto the stage, and suddenly the mood changed completely. This wasn't Dominic Toretto standing there. This was just Vin. A man carrying years of grief that never really went away. The audience could feel it instantly. His voice started shaking almost immediately. Tears filled his eyes. And for a few seconds, nobody in that room even moved. Because everyone realized the same thing at once. This wasn't acting. This was real. For years, Fast and Furious has been sold as a story about cars, action, and family. But standing there at Cannes, Vin Diesel revealed something much deeper. Underneath all the explosions and racing scenes, this franchise became one man's way of honoring a promise to the brother he lost. And once you understand that promise, you can never look at these movies the same way again. To understand why Vin broke down like that, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Back before Fast and Furious became a billion-dollar franchise. Back when nobody involved knew what they were building. The first movie came out in 2001. At the time, it was just a small street racing film with a cast that wasn't exactly stacked with megastars. Vin Diesel wasn't yet one of Hollywood's biggest names. Paul Walker was known, but he wasn't a global icon. They had no idea this thing would last 25 years. No idea they were standing at the beginning of something that would completely change their lives. But somewhere during those early films, something real happened between them. Vin Diesel talked about it openly at Cannes. He said it was never planned that this blue-eyed, blonde-haired guy would become his brother. But that's exactly what happened. And that's what makes this story hit so hard. Their friendship wasn't manufactured by a studio. It wasn't fake Hollywood chemistry created for interviews and press tours. It grew naturally. Long days on set. Shared success. Shared struggles. Years of building something together. The kind of bond that sneaks up on you until one day you realize this person has become family. As the franchise exploded in popularity, Vin and Paul started thinking long-term. Not just about the next movie. About the future. About taking this thing as far as possible. And somewhere along the way, they made a promise to each other. They were going to take Fast and Furious all the way to Fast 10 and beyond. Together. Think about that for a second. Two friends building something side by side. Looking at each other and saying, we are finishing this together.
No contracts. No cameras.
Just trust. Just brotherhood. And then everything changed overnight. On November 30th, 2013, Paul Walker died in a car crash in California. He was only 40 years old. Furious 7 was still being filmed. The world was stunned. Fans mourned him everywhere. Tributes flooded social media. The entire industry paused. But what the public felt was nothing compared to what Vin Diesel experienced privately. Because Vin didn't lose a coworker. He lost his brother. And suddenly that promise they made together became something much heavier. What happens when the person you promise something to is no longer here? Most people would have walked away. Honestly, nobody would have blamed him if he had ended the franchise right there. The studio had options. Reboots. Spin-offs. Endings. There were exits everywhere. But Vin Diesel refused to take any of them. Instead, he made a decision that quietly shaped every Fast and Furious movie after Paul Walker's death. He decided the promise still mattered. He decided Paul being gone was not a reason to stop. It was the reason to keep going. That's what people finally understood at Cannes. For 12 years, Vin Diesel kept showing up. Film after film. Carrying grief most people never fully saw. And he didn't just honor Paul inside the movies. He carried him into his real life too. in ways that are honestly difficult to hear without getting emotional yourself. One of the biggest examples is his daughter, Pauline. Vin Diesel named his daughter after Paul Walker. Not as some temporary tribute. Not as a publicity moment. As a permanent reminder of the man he lost. Pauline was born in 2015, just over a year after Paul's death. And Vin later explained why he chose that name. He said, "When you call her, I know you're near." Just think about that line for a moment. That's not someone who simply moved on. That's a man who built his grief into his daily life so his brother would always remain close to him in some way. And honestly, that changes the entire way people see Vin Diesel. Then there's Meadow Walker, Paul Walker's daughter. After Paul died, Vin Diesel felt responsible for being there for her too. Not because anyone forced him to. Not because of headlines. Because he genuinely viewed her as family. And at the 2026 Cannes screening, Meadow was actually there in the audience. Imagine that scene. Paul Walker's daughter standing there while Vin Diesel openly cried on stage talking about her father. You could feel the weight of 12 years all crashing together in one moment. That's not Hollywood anymore. That's real human loyalty. And then Vin said something that completely shattered the room. He looked out at the audience and said, "I hope that in your life, you have a brother like Paul." Not a friend. Not a co-star. A brother. That word mattered. You could hear it in his voice. He wasn't trying to entertain people. He was telling the truth about what Paul Walker meant to him. And suddenly all those years of hearing family in Fast and Furious stopped sounding cheesy. Because now people understood where it came from. It came from grief. It came from love. It came from a promise. And once you realize that, the entire franchise feels different. But maybe the hardest thing Vin Diesel ever had to do came after Paul's death, when Furious 7 still needed to be finished. Because Paul Walker died before filming was complete. There were unfinished scenes. Unfinished storylines. Nobody knew how to move forward. The filmmakers eventually used unused footage, digital effects, and help from Paul's brothers to complete the film. And what they created became one of the most emotional endings in movie history. You probably remember the scene. Dom and Brian driving side by side one last time before separating at the fork in the road. Then the screen fades white. For Paul. That scene broke people. Audiences sat silently in theaters long after the credits rolled. Grown adults cried openly. Even now, years later, millions of people still rewatch that ending online because it feels less like a movie scene and more like a real goodbye. But here's the part most people never think about. Vin Diesel had to sit through all of that while actually grieving. He had to watch footage of his best friend over and over while helping shape the final tribute. He had to approve scenes knowing this would be the last time the world ever saw Paul Walker on screen. That's not just filmmaking anymore. That's mourning in public. And after finishing Furious 7, he still kept going. That's what made the Cannes moment so powerful. It wasn't just about one speech. It was 12 years of pain finally surfacing all at once. 12 years of carrying a promise. 12 years of refusing to quit. At 58 years old, Vin Diesel stood on that stage and finally allowed himself to feel everything he had been holding back since 2013. The tears people saw weren't only sadness. They were relief too. The relief of a man looking back and realizing he actually kept his word. He did it. Fast X happened. The franchise survived. 25 years later, the promise made between two friends on a movie set was still alive. And something shifted at Cannes. You could feel it. Not because the franchise is ending. More films are still planned. But emotionally, something finally came full circle. That quiet promise between two men had been honored. Film by film. Year by year. Through grief, loss, and pressure, Vin Diesel kept going. And standing there in front of the world, crying openly, he seemed to finally admit something to himself that he had probably been carrying for years. Paul, I did it. And honestly, that's why this story hits so many people so deeply. Because beneath all the fame and blockbuster movies, this isn't really a Hollywood story at all. It's a human story. It's about what happens when someone you love is suddenly gone, but the promises you made to them still remain. Most people know that feeling in some form. A promise. A memory. A responsibility you continue carrying long after the other person is gone. Vin Diesel could have stopped after Paul Walker died. Nobody would have judged him for it. But he chose to keep building anyway. He chose to keep showing up. And for 12 years, he quietly carried that grief without fully letting the world see it. Until Cannes. And maybe that's why the moment felt so powerful. Because for once, people didn't see Dominic Toretto. They saw a man who missed his brother. Some people carry grief loudly. Others carry it quietly for years because the love behind it is simply too real to put down. Vin Diesel is clearly one of those people. And whether you've watched every Fast and Furious movie or not, there's something universal about that. Because anyone who has ever lost someone understands the question at the center of all this. Was it worth continuing after they were gone? According to Vin Diesel, the answer is yes. It always is.